On November 19, 2019, Shinzo Abe became the longest-serving prime minister in Japan's history, and his tenure is far from over. Since becoming prime minister, Shinzo Abe has proven to be the choice the people of Japan have gone to time and time again to lead them. Abe has been described as a far-right nationalist and has used his power to pursue his conservative agenda. Like many other conservatives in this country, Abe wants to restore the traditional Japanese values by bringing back the importance of the emperor and advocating for pride in the nation. Without a doubt, though, one of Abe's biggest goals as prime minister is revising the Japanese constitution written for the nation by the United States after World War II. This has sparked a debate within the country as the nation struggles to decide whether it genuinely wants to change its post-war constitution or not. Despite uncertainty, though, Abe has led the charge and has made it his goal to succeed. Shinzo Abe was born in Tokyo on September 21, 1954, to an influential political family. Abe's great uncle was a former prime minister of Japan, and his father was a foreign minister of the country. The most substantial member of his family, though, was without a doubt Kishi Nobusuke, who was prime minister of the country from 1957 to 1960. Kishi was one of the cabinet members of the pre-World War Japanese government and was arrested with the government to be put on trial for war crimes. But in an effort to fight against the communist parties in Japan, the Allies released Nobusuke because they believed he was the best choice to combat their influence. After his release, Nobusuke created a broad coalition of conservative parties and was one of the founders of Abe's future party, the Liberal Democratic Party of Japan. This earned him a spot as prime minister, and he administered the country during its key years in the late 1950s. His family was a key influence on his ideology and a huge inspiration on his pursuit of political power. Abe would end up studying public administration and getting a bachelor's of political science at Sekai University in 1977. He would even go on to study at University of Southern California for a bit before returning to Japan to work for a private company. By 1982, though, Shinzo had become active in the LDP and worked for his father as executive assistant to the Minister of Foreign Affairs. His political career began in 1993, though, when he was elected to Japan's lower house called the House of Representatives. From then on, Shinzo would work in the House, slowly but surely building his influence. He managed to rise through several positions and become Deputy Chief Cabinet Secretary for multiple governments through the years. Abe eventually gained national prominence in 2002 when he displayed his tough stance on North Korea by confronting them during negotiations on Japanese citizens abducted to the country. This propelled the young politician to the top and soon found himself elected as president of his party. This put him in place to become prime minister in 2006 when the previous government had dissolved. Abe had finally found himself in the position to do the things he wanted and was the youngest person in Japan to do so. His first term didn't last long, though. His administration soon became embroiled in scandals. He received heavy criticism for his slow response to the government's mishandling of pension records of millions of citizens. This would cause his government to fall short and lose the majority it had in the upper house. This loss was a hard hit towards his mandate that required large amounts of support, and by 2007, Abe resigned as prime minister. Despite the fall from power, Abe remained in the House working quietly as Japan cycled through other prime ministers from different governments. He made a comeback in 2012 when the LDP saw a chance to win the majority. Abe was quickly voted as president of the party once again and led his party to victory that scored them a majority in the lower house. He managed to portray himself as someone who could lead the country out of the stagnant economy Japan had at the time. As prime minister, Abe introduced his economic policy called Abenomics, which comprised of three major steps to reinvent the Japanese economy. The first was monetary policy, followed by fiscal stimulus, and would end with structural reform to make Japan more competitive and promote growth. The first phase achieved some success, and with that success, Abe attempted another election to gain a majority in the upper house to get more of his agenda done. By 2014, Abe had won the election and achieved his majority in the upper house. He was finally in the position to achieve the changes in the constitution he wanted. Abe especially wanted to change the peace clause of the constitution, which relinquished the country's right to pursue war for self-defense or threats. If he's successful in revising the constitution, Japan will be able to build a military force for the first time in the post-World War history. The government managed to reinterpret the clause so they can create a defense force, and then attempted to pass bills to make the process easier, but this inspired intense opposition. Protests sparked throughout the country and was a major mark on Abe's government. It didn't help that the Abenomics policy hadn't helped the economy as much as Abe hoped, and Japan fell into another recession. Despite all this, Abe was able to hold on to power and even survived a huge corruption scandal involving his government, along with the First Lady of Japan selling land to a far-right school for a discount price. By the 2019 elections, Abe was polling low, but was still able to win and achieve a majority. Shinzo Abe is now in his fourth term and still pursuing his goal to bring Japan back to what he calls greatness, even if it makes him enemies. Abe's desire to appreciate Japan's imperial history has put him in conflict with countries that suffered under their rule. Abe has spent his tenure tenure as prime minister pushing against history that paints Japan as a villain, as pushed against people accusing Japan of taking sex slaves of Koreans during World War II. This has caused Japan's relations with South Korea to rapidly decay and has caused much unrest in the region when unity is needed in the face of a more powerful China and a nuclear North Korea. There's a lot of challenges for Abe and his government, but it's not impossible for him to get past it, especially since Japan's other political parties haven't been able to produce an attractive alternative to Abe. So until then, Abe still has firm control of power in Japanese politics and will continue to lead the country towards his vision.